Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel for another talk on the esoteric keys of disclosure. Thank you so much for being here with me. So we are pretty deep in this lecture series, and I thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and take a look at the comments underneath the videos and on social media and do a couple videos over the next few weeks that directly address your questions. So the first question that I received is sort of a conglomerate of a bunch of different questions that have been appearing on my social media and in the comments section. And this question is, what about these different beings? So what about gray aliens? What about biological entities? What about these orbs that appear? What about Pleiadians and all these different kinds of aliens? And so I think today is a good opportunity to just sit down and talk about what's going on in the spiritual community and ufology and this sort of really renaming and reclassifying of different kinds of spiritual beings that already are part of our knowledge, our esoteric knowledge. So what's going on right now in society is we are coming into this juggernaut of alien language, and everything is about extraterrestrials. There's these different offices in government that are now created just to observe and analyze UFOs and extraterrestrial life. We kicked off the year with basically a balloon flying across the sky that was clearly a balloon, but the government was insisting on labeling it an unidentified object. So obviously we're coming into this year of disclosure, and the powers that be want to have aliens in our brain, and they want to get us thinking and talking about advanced technology as part of this overall tyrannical power move that we've been a part of for the last 3 years, at least in a big way. So now we're starting to get, what Carol Rosin would call the alien card, which if you've spent any time studying the alternative community and the truth community, you'll understand that the introduction of alien beings is part of these sort of hidden factors in the government and hidden factors in society. It's part of their way of creating a new religion. So the alien card is really the alien UFO religion card. And so that's also what we're seeing going on, although it will probably also be presented as some kind of threat in order to obviously create fear initially, and also kind of relegate funding over into the military industrial complex. And so I don't think that they'll ever let any opportunity to make people afraid go to waste. So I do think that there's going to be different elements to how the UFO card is played. But I mean, clearly it is being played because there has been more news around aliens and UFOs in the last, 7 months, or at least the last few years, than there have been in decades. And that is for a reason. But in our video today, I want to just talk about how this push towards discovering alien life and extraterrestrials in spirituality and in ufology is really destroying traditional and classical esoterica. And I'm going to tell you why. It's destroying classical esoterica. And when I say classical esoterica, I mean our ancestral traditions. I mean the spiritual science that we have been using for thousands of years to identify different types of spiritual beings, the hierarchy of spiritual life beyond ourselves and the cosmos, and all of the nuances that exist basically in spirituality around this is being destroyed. It's being overshadowed by this new ideology that's coming in, that we have to completely rediscover the universe through science and through physical analysis. And then, so we have to redesign the cosmos. We have to rediscover things through the lens of materialist science. And of course, you can't do that, because how the spiritual plane works is that it will immediately show you whatever you are. So you can't objectively view spirit. You actually have to understand that if you are a psychic, or if you're observing something spiritual, it will always show you what you are first. So there is an objective level to understanding the laws of the universe and certain academic knowledge about spirituality and spiritual science. But when it comes to actually observing it and interacting with it, that's actually very personal. And so this is why trying to analyze spiritual phenomenon from a materialist perspective just doesn't work, because you're only going to be observing what you are, right? You're only going to be communicating spiritually with whatever initiation, whatever level of initiation you have personally achieved, which does not speak for everyone on the planet, obviously. So this is a subjective thing. There is a very subjective personal element to spiritual discovery that can't really be scientificized as well, which is needing to be known very clearly. So what's going on now is that any any being that exists now is an alien. Anything that exists, like any orb that shoots across the sky, or across someone's camera screen, is an ET. It's an extraterrestrial. It's an alien. Something that's clearly physical and that is, a puppet or a machine, is an alien. And an angelic being is an alien. So everything is an alien now. And this is sort of creating this new false light paradigm where, again, we're just redefining everything as an extraterrestrial. And we're not understanding that, oh my gosh, actually, pretty much every single esoteric tradition in history has talked about these different spiritual beings, and they're not alien. And actually calling them alien is pretty ridiculous, because spiritual beings are intimately related to the earth, and especially when it comes to the angelic hierarchies, as I've gotten into in other videos. So even using the word alien or extraterrestrial is just not correct. It's not even the correct wording. And wording does matter, because wording is what kind of trains our mind, and it's what becomes the foundation of our understanding. So we have to get the language correct. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's no need to reinvent language. So I like the word interdimensional. I don't mind it, but we can't lose sight of the fact that the word interdimensional is really just another word for spiritual. So the interdimensional planes, or the dimensions, are the spiritual planes in Eastern and Western esoterica. So we're not discovering anything new because we call it something different, is what I'm trying to say. And so there is this sort of loss of classical understanding. And this is really unfortunate, because in earlier epochs of humanity's development, we actually were more clairvoyant. We actually had more of a capacity to know and understand these things. And so there is so much truth in these classical esoteric traditions that we need to incorporate, study, and be able, we need to be able to understand what is going on in our world and what is going on spiritually, what different beings are. But we need to be able to also attach that and weave that in with tradition. So there's this huge push in society to basically leave all tradition behind and just in a Luciferic impulse, just create everything new, but we can't. Especially now that our mind has become so entrenched in materialism that many people don't really even have the level of spiritual initiation or spiritual sight to actually create a new system anyway. The perception just isn't there because of the epoch that we're in, which is all about materiality. So it's actually kind of silly that we think we can redefine the cosmos when we're so deeply disconnected from it, right? So the idea is that certainly every civilization, every epoch, every era will bring forward some new language around spiritual contact. And that new language will reflect the consciousness of the civilization and the consciousness of the era. So it's totally fine to create more meaningful language that reflects where we are. But it's not okay to completely try to excommunicate and get rid of all prior systems and all prior language. We want to add on to our esoteric systems. We want to expand them. We don't want to just get rid of everything that we know. That's foolish. And that's going to absolutely lead to no spiritual evolution at all. So we have to be careful that we're not basically creating a false alien scientist UFO religion by creating new language and essentially redefining beings that we already know as spiritual beings as aliens, because it's not actually even really a workable system, because if somebody wants to enter into that redefined system of all these different classes of alien beings, there's no real way for them to study it on their own. Not really. Whereas when you are able to incorporate the classical systems of identification of these beings, whether it be in the Eastern traditions or Western traditions, then people can really enjoy their spiritual studies, and they can go and they can research all of these different types of beings and the different kinds of traditions, and it's very enriching. Whereas if everything's just an alien being and we're not able to connect in our modern examinations and understandings with the classical, then people aren't able to make that connection, and they're not able to really study this and connect with it in their own way. They're always sort of just going to these, people who communicate with the aliens, or these, scientists who have discovered it or whatever. So we can't lose the classical system of spiritual science, is what I'm trying to say. It's fine to update terminology, add terminology. I do think that we don't have enough language in the spiritual scene anyway. So I think it's good to update that, but not at the expense of losing the esoteric wisdom that we've been carrying thus far. Okay? So let's just do a brief rundown of the different types of beings that exist. And as I mentioned, usually how these beings are analyzed is through usually two different systems. So there's usually the Eastern system, and then there's the Western system. Now, the Eastern system of esoterica can be a little bit more challenging for Westerners, because when you go into the Eastern system, you're sort of facing the challenge of learning another language on top of having to learn very complex spiritual things. So there is a cosmology that is in the Eastern tradition. The different planes are called lokas, and there's different spiritual beings in the spiritual hierarchy. Sometimes they're called devas, and so there is a entire system in different Eastern traditions that is a cosmology that you can learn to study. And then there's the Western tradition as well that has a very clear cosmology, especially anthroposophy, which is the system that I like to use, which clearly outlines the different spiritual planes. And it also outlines the different kinds of spiritual beings and the evolution of the spiritual beings in the spiritual hierarchies, also human evolution in the cosmos, the creation of the earth, the evolution of the earth. These are all foundational principles, by the way. So understanding the epochs, the creation of the earth, the spiritual hierarchies, this is foundational knowledge that every single person should be functioning with in order to even enter into a conversation about aliens or UFOs. So another problem that we're seeing right now is people are essentially trying to enter into a discussion that is fundamentally spiritual, okay? Talking about different dimensions and interdimensional beings is a spiritual topic, okay? The moment that it becomes about life, so beings from other dimensions or non-human intelligence, the moment that it becomes about beings, you've entered into the spiritual category. You've entered into a spiritual discussion. It's no longer just science and exploration. It is now spiritual. Science, materialist science, is fine if you want to analyze a meteor, if you want to do some equations on the chemical composition of, a planet or whatever it is. That's fine. That's materialist science. That's where that belongs. But when you start talking about biological entities from other worlds, right? When you start talking about other beings in the cosmos, when you start talking about interdimensional beings, other dimensions merging with this one, this has now become a spiritual discussion. This is now esoteric. Okay, we have to now enter into the esoteric world and refer to the thousands and thousands of years of esoteric history and esoteric teachings that have been left for us. We don't just abandon that because we feel we have discovered materialist science and have become arrogant and overconfident in that materialist science. We don't just abandon our classical understanding of esoterica and think that we can do everything through that materialist paradigm, because we can't, okay? So when it comes to spiritual beings, or when it comes to alien beings, right off the bat, there is a massive conflation, okay? So we have really different kinds of encounters. Some people's encounters with aliens are physical. It's clearly physical. People's clothing is backwards on their body. They've got intense burns or scrapes. They're physically taken, a ship appears, or it's a very physical experience. And they're physical beings. That is the account of many people who have been abducted and had experiences. Betty and Barney Hill, the Allagash incident, and there's been many in South America that are extremely physical encounters. They're not spiritual encounters. Okay, with that, my analysis on that is that this is our technology, and these are beings that are essentially physical beings that are not even aliens, okay? So we have the technology to create cyborgs, all right? We have the technology to create advanced craft. The idea that these UFOs are absolutely coming from another planet is something that we should not be jumping to that conclusion. We should not be automatically jumping to the conclusion that if there's a ship in the sky or there's a crashed object, that is automatically from Tau Ceti or the planet Sirius. And the reason why we should not jump to that conclusion is that our planet has had prior epochs of development or prior civilizations that have risen and fallen. And The Atlantean period was an extremely technologically advanced period where we had this kind of technology. We had incredible UFO-like crafts, right? We had the ability to be spacefaring. And it was a little different than it is now. Humanity was different than it is now. And the things that were possible then aren't exactly possible now. The human form is a little bit more entrenched in matter, and the Earth is surrounded by membranes and is more isolated in space. So it's not the same environment. We're not the same kind of human being exactly because we evolve. But there has been advanced technology in the Atlantean epoch. Okay. That means that various different secret societies and hidden groups have the ability to create free energy devices and advanced propulsion. Okay, but there are reasons why that is not brought forward. One of the reasons why certain advanced technology is not brought forward is because it ends up affecting the collective consciousness of the planet. So when you start sort of using some of these devices, it acts as an augmentation of where the planetary consciousness is. And so the idea is that these really advanced free energy technologies cannot be used until humanity raises their consciousness. Because you don't want to introduce these things when humanity is in a very lowered state, because it's only going to augment that lowering. Because you can't just turn on some of these advanced technologies and think that it's not going to affect spirit, that's not going to affect consciousness. It does. It has an effect on people's consciousness. So it's working on the very plane, right? So this is why some of these societies don't come forward with these devices, because it actually affects the collective consciousness by creating augmentation of what already is. And if humanity is very troubled and very violent and whatever, then that could potentially only increase when these technologies are brought forward. However, there are societies that are darker that have been wanting to bring certain things out anyway. And there is also the development based on Atlantean technology of new technologies and different kinds of propulsion. But all of these UFOs, all this advanced propulsion is from the Earth. It is earthly. It is just in another epoch. And that epoch, that Atlantean epoch, is so different than our current epoch that it seems like another planet. It seems like another world. It's so advanced. It just seems like it's not even of this world. And so we don't understand the Earth's ancient past. And so we make everything extraterrestrial and we make everything alien. And all of that is just simply because we don't understand the Earth's past epochs and that we had advanced civilizations in the past. We shouldn't automatically be just defaulting to the extraterrestrial hypothesis all the time, which is what happens in the media and various different individuals that are coming forward that keep doing this and pushing the conversation this way. Again, there's no reason to keep calling, this advanced technology extraterrestrial. And there's a great loss for humanity when we do keep calling it extraterrestrial, because what that does is it kind of just makes us sitting ducks for the military industrial complex and these weird secret societies that want to use the UFO topic to take over society. It kind of just allows them to create a whole new paradigm and never be held accountable, because we're not using the classical systems of esoterica and knowledge, classical wisdom, to confront the issue. They're just creating a whole new paradigm of extraterrestrial beings and materialist science that is usurping our classical knowledge. And we're not using that. We're not using our discernment. And we're not actually using all this wisdom that we have to confront this massive manipulation. We just keep allowing things to be called extraterrestrial. We allow angels to be called extraterrestrials. We allow demonic entities to be called extraterrestrials. We're allowing beings that are probably just cyborgs made in a lab somewhere to be called extraterrestrials. Everything is an alien. And that gives the powers that be the ability to just make them whatever they want, because it's an alien, it's a foreign being, we don't know what it is. And so that means that their professionals get to go in, their scientists get to go in, their analysts get to go in, and they get to tell us what it is. Because it's foreign, it's alien. And now we need all these scientists that are basically just trying to be scientist priests ushering in the new age. They get to come out and say, well, this is where this is from, this is what this is, and this means this for the earth, and this means this for humanity. It's a sneaky way to create a new religion through science and aliens. That's all it is. Okay, so there are lots of different things that are being classified as alien that are not alien. We're not looking at a being that came from another planet. Not really. Okay, so elemental beings are also sometimes called devas. They're part of the spiritual hierarchy, but they're sort of more known as nature spirits or fairies. And they are not directly working with the human kingdom. They work with the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom and the mineral kingdom. And they've been known for a very long time in a lot of different cultures. Especially in Irish culture and even Northern European culture. There's a huge understanding of the Fae and of the elemental beings that live in the forest. And in this wing of classical esoterica, there's different kinds of elemental beings. So there's different elemental beings that basically personify the elemental forces. So earth, air, fire, water. So there's Sylphs, there's Udines, there's Gnomes, right? And these beings actually can appear to people. And sometimes they can appear and they're just a ball of light moving above the grass. They're just a ball of light in the forest. Right? Some people will actually see a little being. And sometimes these beings are not little. I've personally seen elementals and the angels of them, or the angels of the natural world, as being robed and larger. Right? I've seen elemental beings that look a little bit grotesque. They look like they're part. They look a little bit strange. Right? Someone could look at an elemental, whether it be a light, like a fairy light, or an elemental being moving about nature, and they could look at that and they could say that's a UFO. Right? But it's not. It's an elemental being. They could actually see an elemental being, a small, they often manifest as smaller, and they could be like, that's an alien. That's not an alien, that's an elemental. That's a nature spirit. That's an angel of the natural world that is taking care of the animals and the plants. So it's part of the angelic hierarchy, but it is, instead of it being a guardian angel for human beings, these are angelic beings that guard the group souls of animals and plants in the mineral kingdom. So the angelic hierarchies walk amongst us all the time. And they are responsible for their actual bodies occupy the clouds, the water, every element. And these beings can manifest and appear to you, right? And so, again, this UFO cult, basically, this new public UFO cult is basically removing that classical area of esoteric study that is the elementals, that is the nature beings. That's all being called an alien, and nobody is really understanding that this is a whole area that you can study and that you can learn, which is all to do with the nature spirits. And there's so many people, especially years ago, that were extremely close to these natural spirits and loved to commune with them. And so it's actually incredibly sad that a topic like that can be astroturfed by this almost like pathological desire to label everything as alien. Everything is off world. Everything is not of the earth. It's like we're destroying everything that is of the earth, and therefore our ability to actually be on the earth and our ability to actually understand ourselves. So the UFO alien cult stuff is really also a cult of disassociation, of not wanting to be on Earth. And that's also why you see so many people who are so into the alien god myth as also being so into like colonizing other planets and space gods. And the space gods came here and created us, and we get to create people now and create worlds. It's all just a very strange ideology that's being born through disassociation and through not wanting to be on Earth. And not wanting to be on Earth translates to not wanting to be in your body, because our body is the Earth. And we don't want to be in our body because it hurts. Because when we come very deeply into our body, we feel our pain, we feel our trauma, and our body stores all of the worry and all of that. And so there's this immediate reaction in human beings to want to be out of body, to disassociate, to get off planet, to just abandon all responsibility. And the real task is obviously to heal our bodies, to harmonize with them, to harmonize with God, and to heal the planet, to understand and live in harmony with all the kingdoms of life on the planet, right? That's the real task at hand, not leaving the planet and abandoning it, like just using it up, sucking it dry, and then colonizing other worlds because we failed at this one. This is the pathological stuff that we're getting into that's very dangerous. It doesn't lead to evolution, it leads to devolution. And the only reason why people think it's evolved, despite its clear spiritual deficit, is because people think that technology is advancement. Technology is not advancement. Okay, advancement is being able to be spiritually aware, right? Advancement is spiritual transformation and the eventual transformation of your physical form into spirit, or the resurrection mysteries. That is advancement. Technology is just stuff. And technology, like I've said many different times, technology cannot make you really, truly live forever. Technology cannot, it can trap you in the material plane and make it so you can't ever cross over. But that's not living forever, right? Living forever is being liberated from the material plane and becoming completely conscious and completely aware. Transhumanism locks you in the spiritual plane. There is no liberation. So it's a completely backwards ideology. And so the idea that you can use technology also to travel into like higher dimensions or something, or just travel anywhere in time with technology, these are lies. This is propaganda. You can't do that with a machine. The only thing that can do that is your human body when it is attuned to the sun and to Christ. Eventually, you can turn into what's called a spiritual master or a very high spiritual adept that can do incredible things. In the Indian tradition, this is called the siddhis, siddhis. And so you can actually, through spiritual work, you can actually do incredible things. You can bilocate, you can astrally project at will. You can do incredible things with your body. These are mostly forgotten now, but you do all that through spiritually evolving, right? And eventually you can get off the wheel of incarnation, and that means you're beyond time, right? So these are all spiritual things that we do through spiritual development and the transfiguration of ourselves. The transmutation of our darkness into light makes us capable of so much more than we can even imagine. But technology can't do that. Technology can only basically start poking into the abyss, from the earth to the abyss, which is basically the lowest plane possible. But the people that make this technology believe it's the most spiritual plane, and they believe that traversing the abyss with their weird technology is like traversing all the dimensions of time. So these people are deluded, okay? What they think is possible with technology is not possible. You know, in order to go into a higher plane or a higher dimension, you have to actually transform your very nature through the solar force or through Christ. That's how you go into the higher planes. That's how you can go beyond time itself. All of that is through inner work. It's a spiritual process. You can't, a machine can't do that. A machine can only work with the material plane and the very lowest astral plane or the abyss. That's what's going on there. So this whole idea that advancement is technology is not true. Advancement is spiritual development, plain and simple. There are no shortcuts, okay? So unfortunately, elemental beings are being labeled as aliens and being labeled as ETs. And even Jacques Vallée and Keel talked about this. They talked about how they were essentially initially believing that everything was an extraterrestrial, and they were major proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, kind of like what humanity is going through now. And then the more they studied it, the more they realized that most stuff, like the vast majority of things that go on with aliens and UFOs, especially light anomalies, especially things that are not nuts and bolt crafts, right? That's just spiritual phenomenon, and it's spiritual phenomenon that has been observed for thousands and thousands of years. Spiritual phenomenon that we already have a system for to understand. And you can kind of see this already coming forward a little bit in a lot of the disclosure movement by people being like, well, you know, it really is these interdimensionals. Okay, well, that's saying it's spiritual beings. If you say interdimensional, you're referring to a spiritual being. Calling them interdimensional does not create a new category of life in the cosmos. If something is interdimensional, that means it's a spiritual being and you're dealing with a spiritual phenomenon. Again, there are certain technologies that can do pretty intense and crazy things, but those technologies are not able to go into the higher worlds. It's very limited what they can do, but it looks impressive to us because we are not aware of how they work, and have no memory of Atlantis, and we're sort of at a major deficit right now. But basically, there is some dialogue going on, and that's eventually where things are going to go. Eventually, probably the disclosure movement will say that this is all interdimensionals or spiritual beings, and then you basically have your end times conversation or whatever, where we went this weird roundabout way of talking about UFOs and aliens, but then it all just comes down to interdimensionals, and eventually, okay, this is a spiritual war going on. These are spiritual beings, and you just end up coming right back to the classical understanding anyway. Even though there's this desire to enter into it from aliens and science and things like that, we're all going to come back to the realization that we're just talking about spiritual beings. So There are different kinds of angels. Now, the angels, as I've mentioned many times on my channel, are part of something called the angelic hierarchies or the spiritual hierarchies. And these angels, when they're very high, so when they're in the highest planes of creation, they just feel like a force. But the more lower levels of the angelic hierarchy, they're clearly individuals, right? And so how the cosmos is created is over time, um, as the universe and the solar system is created, there are different levels of density or different levels of consciousness that are also created. And this is the real way in which time is kept, is when a planet formed and when a planet is destroyed, and when a plane formed and when a plane is destroyed, and then all the sub actions on those planes and planets is another way of keeping time. So the cosmos is really just one big clock when you're looking at time that way. And so there's also different levels of the angelic hierarchy that come to pass to embody these different levels of creation and time, right? And so a lot of people will see an angel, right? They'll see an angel and they'll think this is a Pleiadian or this is an alien being. And it's not, it's an angel from the spiritual hierarchies. And the reason why I keep coming back to that is, again, if we use the spiritual scientific term or the classical term, that means that you can have so much information on it that you couldn't possibly read it in your life. There's so many lectures available online and books and things you can study, the angels or the spiritual hierarchies. You wouldn't even have enough time to take all of it in, right? So when we rename something and we call what has really been called an angel for the last thousands of years, and you start calling it something different, you're just not able to access all of the information available. You're not able to actually inform yourself enough even to do spiritual work on it, because if you're not informed, so if you don't have a good understanding of spiritual science, right, you can't read energy very well because you don't have a foundation. You don't have a foundational knowledge in which to read anything with, because everything that we perceive in the spiritual world is going to use our internal lexicon of what we have learned in our life. And so that's why learning and reading and academically studying spiritual topics is the best thing you can do for your intuition, because it allows you to basically have a strong foundation in which to categorize and understand what you're experiencing, right? So it's important that everybody does, that anybody who's serious about understanding these things does have a study of this, right? Because we can't just intuit everything. We're not omnipresent, right? We're people. We have to be informing ourselves. So the different angels are now being called alien beings, right? And there's also different beings from the lower planes that are actually not angels at all. They'd actually be classified as demonic entities or false light entities. And they can actually appear as shining. They can appear in spacesuits. They can appear as an alien being if they feel like that is going to make you listen to them. And so we also have an issue with discernment, where how do you discern a angelic being or a higher being from a lower being? Because it's almost like a rite of passage that every single person has to overcome some sort of challenging delusion that they were in, right? And so this happens across the board with spiritual communication. It's why so many mystics and psychics and the whole field is not respected very much in society, is because discernment is often so poorly, it doesn't exist often. And so many people just become literally direct mouthpieces for dark entities. And so it's hard to get the field of psychic awareness, of spiritual science, it's hard to get it going. It's hard to get it respected in many ways because so many people look at the spiritual field in the new age and they think, oh my God, there's so many people out there that are absolutely deluded and channeling some really dark stuff. And that's actually pretty dangerous. And so we're at this weird place where we have to understand discernment, and we have to understand that we can be tricked. And that the only way to not be tricked by lower entities is to really know thyself. You really have to know who you are. You have to know what your wounds are. And you have to know, you just have to really know your light and shadow, because we are always tricked and deluded where we are wounded. And so there is this idea of know thyself, and that protects us actually from being tricked by lower entities. Okay. And by the way, this is not, it's normal to, when you're learning how to be sensitive, when you're getting your permeability back, when you're becoming more spiritual, it's normal to go through those kinds of trickster experiences. It's how we come out of it that matters, right? But we cannot ignore the conversation that you can have a dark entity appear to you as an alien being, and they can say that they're an alien being, and they can appear as that, and they have ways of sort of creating mania that feels like love for a lot of people in their body. And so it is something that, when it comes to connecting with interdimensionals or spiritual beings, we have to be always working and understanding that there is tricksters, there is trickery, right? All right. And also having a good foundation, as I was saying, of understanding spiritual science also protects you, because you're able to read other people's accounts. You're able to read a lot of good treatises on this. And when you study it, it also allows you to have enough knowledge that you're harder to be tricked, right? Okay, so there's also spiritual masters. Okay, so technically spiritual masters are kind of within the spiritual hierarchy, but spiritual masters have a different tone to them. And they are essentially human beings of the earth that have transcended matter. So these are human beings that have moved beyond the typical human development, and they have chosen to assist humanity by teaching often from the spiritual planes, and they have incredible capacities. Now, angelic beings and spiritual masters do not use technology. So you're not going to have a high spiritual adept or an angelic being like show up in a ship. They don't need technology. They've mastered the material plane. They can do any task in the material world with their mind, and they can influence it with their sheer energy, with their consciousness. So genuinely advanced beings do not use technology. They don't use technology to get around. They don't use technology to heal themselves or other people, okay? Because all of that power is now within them. Okay, the kingdom of heaven is within them. All that power and influence is something that can be done through an operation within themselves that then creates an effect on the physical plane, right? So it's really important to know that, because we're going to come into this age in the future where technology is going to be presented as the answer to everything. It's the answer to healing. It's the answer to spirituality. It is, I always think that they're going to try to use, something like the Q movement to make people think that we also have to get our spiritual information from some prophet, from some looking glass like Q computer system, and technology and computers are more pure than human beings. And so the more that we go into this hyper-technological age, the more we deny our humanity, and the more we deny these capacities within ourselves. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't technologies that could be useful. It doesn't mean that there aren't technologies that could help with the healing arts. It's just how are we using them? And we cannot try to insert technology where we really need to be working on ourselves. So technology shouldn't be making us lazier. It shouldn't be making us not turn inward. And ultimately, the only thing that can really transform your body is the essence of Christ. And technology cannot give you the essence of Christ. You have to develop that within yourself. So while even some healing technologies may be able to introduce a certain harmonizing frequency, they can't truly, truly, truly heal. They can't truly, truly transform you, because only Christ within your body can transform you. Only that Christ essence within you can transform you from the inside out. There is no transformation from a machine or from the outside in. You can create perhaps a more relaxed state, a more harmonious state that allows you to perhaps sense or feel Christ a little bit easier by creating a certain environment, right? But a machine cannot actually be Christ. As much as we are going to be told that, it's not possible. All right. So there are also spiritual masters that are not extraterrestrial at all. They're actually human beings, and they've mastered material reality through sacrifice, through service, and performing great feats. And one of the weirdest narratives in the New Age, obviously, is that like every spiritual master or every avatar is really like an alien, like Jesus is an alien and the Buddha is an alien. And all that does is remove their sacrifice. And it basically says that the only reason why they were exceptional people was because they were off-world and they were an alien. And that is the most toxic satanic ideology, because it's basically saying that you can't be like them because you're not an alien, because you're clearly born on this planet. You're clearly a human being, right? And so that's why those ideas in the New Age are so insidious, that Jesus is an alien, that the Buddha was an alien, that Krishna was really an alien. They weren't human. They were really an alien. They're basically an alien. That means that you can't do what they did, and that removes their sacrifice entirely, and that is satanic. That's dark. That's an inversion by definition. It's a lie. And so we're even turning spiritual masters and extremely advanced human beings that achieved something through hard work, through coming to the earth and sacrificing and actually achieving incredible power. We're taking that away from them, from the Christ, from Buddha, by saying, oh, well, they're just an alien. That's why they were able to do that. That's outsourcing our power, and it doesn't make any sense. The whole reason why these incredible avatars and masters came to the planet is to show us, you can do this. I am like you. You are like me. We are the same. So to call that an alien is so backwards and so dangerous to people who are just learning about spirituality, because it's outsourcing something that's already within us. And that is the whole problem with the alien God ideology and all of this weird stuff. It's all based in Christ not being within. It's always outsourcing all of this evolution, all of this. It's always pushing you outside of yourself. and it's all lies. So the spiritual masters are human, okay? They're human beings that have transcended matter to varying degrees. There's nothing alien about them, zero. And the whole point is that they are like you. The whole point is that they are a human being in a human body. The soul may be advanced, okay? But they're human beings. And if there is anything otherworldly about another human being, it is because their soul is advanced. But they're human. They're fundamentally human, using the human system on the earth. Okay, no, there's no point in disassociating from the earth. You're on the earth. Okay, so we have the sort of removal of elemental beings and nature spirits. We have the removal of basically every being in the angelic hierarchy is like, even when you go back to, like, you know, different clearly spiritual images of aliens, like the clouds parting and cherubim, you know, beaming the sun through, you know, for example, in Mary's Annunciation. You know, people will look at literally aliens angels in the sky and say that's a UFO, right? And so it's even accounts of what are clearly angelic beings from the angelic hierarchies materializing on the planet for a certain time. They're like, oh, that's an alien, right? And it's like, no, the spiritual hierarchies are associated with different planetary spheres. The planetary spheres are associated with different levels of human development in the solar system. And the solar system is one big school. And every planet, there's a slightly different kind of human and of human development. The Earth is the consolidation, the most dense consolidation sphere thus far. And so there are beings from other worlds that have come here, especially in the Atlantean epoch, but not really the same way after. But yeah, there are angels that have literally materialized on the planet, but they're not aliens, right? And so there is this, because they're associated with different planetary spheres, like, for example, the Venusians, the angels from Venus, they're, you know, just because they came through the Venusian plane doesn't make them an alien. It doesn't mean they came in a ship, right? So there is this literalism going on that has proliferated to the point that we don't even know what we're talking about anymore. And lower entities are entering into that heavily distorted and bizarre ideology and are like, yeah, that's where they're going to be, right? Because, you know, it's just so bizarre. So again, something could be an elemental that's completely earthly, right? There's so many different ways in which elementals appear, right? And something can be an angel from the spiritual hierarchies or the angelic hierarchies, and that's not an alien. All right. There's also, of course, demonic beings and demonic entities. Now, what is considered, now, demonic has become a very orthodox term, a very dogmatic term, but it's correct. I mean, there are demonic beings and there is a demonic plane. Demonic plane is really like the lower aspect of the earth. That's why hell is always kind of a lower part of the earth. And in anthroposophy, it's called the eighth sphere. In the New Age, it's called the lower astral plane. It's associated with the moon realm, the lowest part of the moon realm. Pretty much every esoteric tradition will go into the lower planes. And I believe in Buddhism, they're called the Nakara realms. And so every single esoteric tradition has a sort of, usually a purgatorial hell realm and certain laws around when souls go through there when they die, but also the beings that are sort of trapped in that plane that can't get out because of their like evil nature. Basically, they're basically inverted and darkened in their spirit. And so another word in mystery science for the eighth sphere is sometimes the abyss, and also at times oblivion. So there's different words usually for the lower planes depending on kind of like where you're entering into them from. But it is a pretty fascinating line of study, because what's happened is that eighth sphere, the abyss, is really, it's not another planet at all. And the beings that are trapped within the abyss or the eighth sphere, they're not aliens. But it's understandable why people would think they were in modern times, because they look inhuman. So the first thing that begins to happen when you enter the abyss, if you're a fallen angel or a fallen entity, a fallen soul essence, and to be fallen, you have to turn your back against God and yourself, but via your own free will. Okay? So when you begin to fall into the influence of the abyss and the eighth sphere, what ends up happening is that you begin to deform, and you usually start to manifest the lower kingdoms on your body. So like you'll get animal parts or insect parts, and that's to show that you're losing your humanity and you're devolving. Okay. And so when you see all of these extraterrestrial beings that are basically chimeras, that really is very, very similar to how demonic entities were actually portrayed in the medieval times and earlier times. They're portrayed as chimeras. Even the fallen angels, even Lucifer, who once had feathered wings, right? Who was portrayed, who would have once been part of the host of angels in very early periods. When he fell and was cast into the abyss, he began to get portrayed as having bat wings or insect wings, and he began to be portrayed as having cloven hooves and having these animal parts, whereas the angels that did pass the initiation and that did not fall into the abyss, they were portrayed as beautiful humans with bird wings, beautiful feathers, auras glowing. They're portrayed as being beautiful human beings. There's not an animal part on them. That's to show that this is a devolutionary plane. This eighth sphere is a plane of devolution. It's where you lose your humanity slowly. And so all those beings get trapped in that eighth sphere until the planet, basically, the planetary cycle is complete. And then there's sort of a reconstitution and a reamalgamation of souls, a transmigration of souls, depending on the development of the soul. So there's this catch-all that is surrounding the planet that's called the abyss or the eighth sphere, the lower astral plane. And that is the first thing that people usually encounter. And most psychics will also describe, when they're first tuning in, they'll often describe moving through darker imagery, like weird faces or weird imagery, or when you fall asleep, you can sometimes see weird, grotesque images or very strange things, and then you're through it. That's that lower plane. Okay. And so there are beings there. And the beings usually look like chimeras. They usually look like deformed humans. Rudolf Steiner's bust of Ahriman is really fascinating, because he looks very deformed. He looks very severe. He does not look like a normal human, right? And so when a soul essence that is human goes into the eighth sphere, it begins to become deformed, and it begins to take the form of its mind. It loses it loses the human form and begins to degenerate into a inhuman form. or the form will look degenerated. So even when you look at like the grays and stuff like that, that's very typical for if a human being were to lock into the eighth sphere, become possessed by beings from the eighth sphere, become possessed by fallen angels, fallen entities. Over time, if they're unable to break out of that, they will begin to take on a degenerated form, right? And so you see these beings too, these like grays, and it's almost like they're fighting their own degeneration because of where they've locked themselves into, right? So there are demonic beings from the lower planes that people think are aliens. They show up in people's visions, right? There's just a psychic, there's just someone who's meditating who just wants a meditation practice, or a psychic that's tuning in, and a being from the demonic plane will appear as an alien in a spacesuit, or like, hi, I'm an alien being from planet, bleep bleep bloop, or whatever it is, Arcturus, or something like that. And it's not. It's literally a being from the abyss. And the reason why they tell people that they're aliens is because if people think, again, that something is an alien or a UFO or off-world, then there is this ability to control the narrative more. Because if something's truly foreign and off-world, there really is no system to understand it. And so you're just sort of like a sitting duck, like waiting to be told, or there's automatically even some superiority that you give these beings. In reality, they're actually inferior to you. They're actually losing their humanity, and they're just communicating with you because they want to attach to you. And they actually want to break free from the abyss that they're trapped in. And so a lot of very shadowy, dark occult stuff is directly due to people being in contact and worshiping these beings, and also creating forms for these beings to enter into. It gets very dark and very weird, which I'll briefly cover today. But what is going on in the world in regards to beings is so much more complex than just simply calling them interdimensionals or just simply calling them aliens. And it's the same stuff that's been going on this planet for thousands of years, essentially. So this is why you'll see religious people oversimplify things and say, oh, it's demons, or oh, it's angels. Because in a sense, they're standing on some solid ground there. Because if it is a spiritual entity, those are the two categories in which beings can fall into, right? So we've covered the dark side. And I want to say, too, the reason why I'm talking about dark demonic trickster entities that masquerade as aliens. They'll masquerade as anything. They'll masquerade as Jesus. They'll masquerade as all kinds of things, right? It's the thing that nobody really likes to talk about because everyone gets really intimidated that they're going to be tricked. But it's part of, you have to learn discernment. You can't avoid it. You have to learn how to work your spiritual bodies, and you have to learn how to discern. But the reason why I mention this is that overwhelmingly, people who talk about communicating with aliens, overwhelmingly, it's people having astral contact. So it's people being taken from their beds in their astral body to what they feel is a ship, or to communicate with beings they feel are aliens or that tell them they're aliens. It's telepathic communication of someone sitting and channeling alien beings. They're not going anywhere. You can see their body, but they're just channeling an alien being. Okay, well, that's a spiritual process. You're calling it an alien being that you're channeling, or you're going on a ship, but your physicality is staying here. Your astral body is being taken, and that is typical for any shamanic experience. It's typical for dreaming. When you go to bed, everybody's astral body leaves their physical body when they go to bed. When they dream, they enter we all enter the astral plane. That's how we function, right? So what people are calling, alien contact a lot of the times are not actually being physically taken anywhere. They have never been physically taken anywhere on a ship. They've never touched a physical alien being. It is literally just channeling. The same way you would channel a deceased relative, the same way that you would channel anything. It's just now they're channeling aliens. But it's just it's a spiritual process. It may be a spiritual process connecting with lower things or not. You have to, evaluate the person doing it. But a lot of stuff that's being called alien or from another planet is just spiritual. It's taking part in the spiritual planes. Therefore, it is a spiritual phenomenon. And that the ability to channel, the ability to astral travel, to astrally project, to commune with astral beings is as old as time. So we're not reinventing the wheel here either. Most people who are having abduction experiences, who are channeling aliens, again, this is an astral experience. It's an astral encounter. It's a spiritual encounter. The vast majority, the cases where people actually get taken on physical ships and they have serious marks on their body, or they have, or it's a physical experience, those are the most rare. So a lot of what we're looking at in, spiritual, a lot of it is spiritual stuff, but we're starting to call it alien. But what's occurring is nothing new. There's also something else that's going on, and this tends to really this one is really interesting to talk about, because there are sometimes physical entities. There's, biological entities or these beings from other worlds. And my analysis on that is that it's probably most likely something that is created in a lab. Just like our physical technology is way more advanced than we think it is. Like, we're flying around in planes and like using pretty archaic technology compared to what the military industrial complex has. This is the same thing with things like cloning and creating chimeras and creating beings, creating cyborgs. They've been on that. I mean, the Macy conferences were in the 20s or 30s, right? And they were already talking about cybernetics then, right? So there's so much more ahead. The government and the military industrial complex is so much farther ahead when it comes to genetics and cloning and chimeras and all that kind of stuff. It's an ethical, moral issue, so they're just doing it privately. And a lot of what people see as these biological entities and stuff are created in a lab. Okay, they're chimeras, they're cyborgs. And you can see this because there's these different people who were basically abducted onto these ships. And it's obviously a physical experience. And then they're like, yeah, it was basically like a robot. It was basically like a alien gray looking robot. And people will talk about different locations where there's these chimeras and these robots, and they're basically genetically engineered creatures that sometimes have had these encounters that are probably psyops, right, to interact with people. But they're made in a lab, right? They're just chimeras, they're cyborgs that are made by us on the planet, can we really honestly say, like, why are we jumping to the conclusion if we have the technology, right? And cyborgs are nothing new in our culture. Chimeras are nothing new for humanity. Look at Atlantis again. Look at Atlantis. Atlantis fell and went into horrendous cataclysms because they were messing with genetics, because they were creating cyborgs, because they were doing all this stuff that's unethical. So a lot of the stuff that's happening now, again, we've been through in earlier civilizations and we're just repeating it. So it's like the same thing with a lot of the nuts and bolts ships. It's, why are we automatically going with the extraterrestrial hypothesis? If we have the technology on the planet to create it, which we do, it stands to reason that we do, why would we look at a biological entity that looks like a gray alien or some kind of human insect chimera or some kind of human animal chimera? Why are we going to default and say that's an alien? The first default that we should have is that was created in a government lab. Why? Because we have the technology. If people want to believe mainstream lies about what we're capable of technologically, that's fine. But I don't think it pays to fool ourselves. They have so much more advanced technology. They're incredibly far ahead compared to where we think. So if we have the technology even with crafts, even with these different UFOs and stuff like that, if we have the potential to create that technology, then we should view it as our own. Then we should view it as something that we've created. Put the pressure back on these private companies and these dark secret societies that are trying to use the alien narrative to manipulate us into a techno-dystopian and weird alien god religion. Turn that back on them. Say, this is from a lab. This ship is probably our own. Don't give these darker groups in society the opportunity to say, this is an extraterrestrial device, this is an extraterrestrial being, and rewrite the human origin story and redefine society into a techno-dystopia, because that's what this is all about. If we have the technology to create beings, which we do, and we have the technology to create advanced propulsion beyond what we're publicly having, which we do, then let's assume that that's what that is. We know about Atlantis as well. So we have within our lexicon all of the information we need. We just have to get in the right position. Okay? So the other thing about biological entities that I want to say is that there's always been this practice in Black magic of the creation of the golem or the creation of the homunculus. And what it is it's basically creating without women. So it's basically trying to create forms, trying to create beings without the womb, without women. And that allows them to also potentially ensoul beings from the abyss. So when people create these biological entities, these alien beings, okay, what essence is in there? Because the incarnation of certain spirits, a la like the Babylon working, and there's an occult practice of ensoulment, right? And so the whole thing about these golems or these weird biological chimera things, these cyborgs, is that they're really just golems. They're really just a sophisticated form of a golem that is probably trying to ensoul something from the abyss. I mean, that is the occult side of transhumanism, of cyborgs, of chimeras that nobody wants to talk about, is that it's nothing new. It's something that Black magicians have been doing for a long time, is trying to create beings without women being involved, without the womb, without birth, or trying to basically control incarnation and trying to ensoul darker entities from the abyss. Okay? So could be what's being called an alien. How do we know that's not created in a lab? Seriously, right? And a lot of the times they're going to have a weird degenerated form, because remember, the astral form is already degenerated anyway. So you can have something that looks like a gray in the astral plane or whatever and create a form for that entity. And there's actually, I don't have time today to get into the grays, but there's actually a lot deeper uh, vein of conversation to have about the grays and about degenerated humans from earlier periods and things like that. But I'll just finish it on this. Another thing that's going on is that there are beings that are crypto-terrestrials. A crypto-terrestrial is basically a human being of the earth that is living parallel to humanity. And they don't usually live on the surface of the earth or openly on the earth, but usually they're related to prior civilizations on the earth. So, for example, there could be a breakaway civilization from Atlantis. So you could have different beings that were, for example, from Atlantis that have a colony basically in the in a cavern system, or in certain locations under the sea, or in certain remote locations that they could be, there could be a colony of basically beings, people that are technically living side by side with us, but that are now pretty inhuman. And there were massive genetic experiments done in Atlantis. And there are also degraded human beings as well that would look very similar to the grays. And so there's different types of beings that are basically breakaways from the earlier civilizations on the planet. And it's very possible that these crypto-terrestrials also have very advanced technology from the Atlantean epoch, from these earlier periods, right? And so what people think are like an off-world alien is really just a crypto-terrestrial. It's just from the Atlantean epoch. It's literally something from this earth. So the vast majority of stuff that people are thinking is alien is actually probably directly associated with the earth. And the only reason why we keep calling it alien and extraterrestrial is literally to obfuscate the traditional classical spiritual teachings that help us understand what is going on. Okay, so there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot going on out there. If you see an orb, it could be lots of different things. It could be an elemental, it could be a kind of angel, it could be spiritual master. You could be seeing, just a hint of something that is in the spiritual planes, right? There's beings that are created. Yes, there are laboratories that exist that could absolutely be creating deformed looking things that darker secret societies want to pass off as being alien, because they want people to believe in this alien god religion. Right? It could also be this reemergence of these degenerated human beings from Atlantis that want to re-enter into humanity, re-enter into the life wave, right? There's so many different things that are going on when it comes to genetic manipulation. How do we know that this biological entity that was found in some crash discovery is really an alien? I mean, were you there? Or are we just listening to what these different whistleblowers and different people say that could very well be being paid? They could be being blackmailed. They're often part of the government anyway, and therefore bound by certain oaths to serve it. How do we know? Seriously, why are we listening to that? If there's the potential that something that could be created in a lab, could be cyborg, it's a golem, it's a weird thing. I mean, really, we have to really be serious about that? Was it made in a lab? Because chances are a lot of the biological stuff, I'm going to say, probably is. Because when something is manifesting genuinely from a spiritual plane, it takes a lot of energy. It is possible. It is possible that a being can manifest from the abyss. Okay. It is possible that spiritual beings can manifest physically. That would be an interdimensional being materializing from a higher or lower plane. It is possible for them to do that, but it is rare. It is very rare, and there are a lot of laws, spiritual laws around it. So yeah, it absolutely is possible that a being from another plane could manifest here, but it takes a lot of energy. And most of the stuff that I think we'll see or that has been seen is probably made in a lab. Why are we excluding that? We have to really hold that and rule out the most reasonable things, right, before we start jumping into the extraterrestrial thing. Let's rule out the most reasonable conclusions first, rather than think that an interdimensional materialized. Or so, like, let's not start with the most fantastical and difficult and unlikely. Let's start with the most likely, right? The next thing, obviously, crypto-terrestrials. There are beings that are from prior epochs of the Earth that look like degenerated humans, or that look like even chimerical forms. They look deformed because we know that Atlantis was heavily into genetic modification. If we have survived Atlantis, which we have, then why couldn't other beings have survived it that were essentially part of what Edgar Cayce called the things? Right? A lot of Native American traditions also have stories about very strange looking beings coming from the inner earth or coming from different weird, technologies and stuff. There's no need to think that, something coming from the inner earth that's really a crypto-terrestrial that has advanced technology from a prior epoch is an alien. It's not. It's technically of the earth. Okay, so let's bring it back to reality. Let's bring it back to the earth. Let's reference the esoteric systems we already have to confront anything that's coming. Okay, so the desire to label everything as extraterrestrial, as alien, is nonsensical. And it is to distract us. It is to drive us away from using spiritual science and classical systems to begin to analyze the world around us and basically reawaken to the incredibly rich and beautiful spiritual beings that are around us, the truths that are around us. We have an incredibly rich culture of spirituality, and it's time to return to that. We can definitely modernize some of the language. We can expand on the language, honestly, but we shouldn't be trying to eliminate it. It's not going to serve us to try to create some weird new scientist alien system, right? So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you in my next video.